I've heard of defenses before. I don't think that one is going to fly for him, but nice try. Listen, if you want to follow the top trending stories of the day, you can go to lawandcrime.com. And as always, great reporting by our very own Anthony Velez. But right now, let's talk about the Tammy Moore verdict. I'm about to reveal it to you. But before we do that, I want to analyze a little bit about this case. And joining me is my very special guest, criminal defense attorney and former Bronx ADA, Lizette Fernandez. Lizette, great to have you here.
Thank you, Jesse. Nice to be here.
I'm going to ask you straight up, was it a good idea for Tammy Moore, the defendant, to take the stand and testify? Because we usually only see it in self-defense cases. Do you think it was necessary in this case?
I do not. I do not think it's not a smart idea. It's always a strategic idea. Counsel always weighs out the strategies behind it. And in this particular case, I do not think it was a good idea. I think she might have done herself a disservice.
And you know what's interesting? Do you ever have clients who are like, listen, I want to tell my side of the story. This is my opportunity. Do you get that?
You get that, and it's difficult. You counsel them, you advise them, you explain to them in lay terms. They don't understand the law. You have to explain to them the ramifications. But at the end of the day, a client has rights, and if the client so wishes to proceed against counsel's advisories, then they do that.
Well, we saw her on the stand. There was a lot of back and forth between her and the prosecution, and then the defense had to make up some ground and ask her some questions. They had to fix her on the stand because there were some questions that got a little iffy. Well, really it all matters. What happened? Did the jury come back with a guilty verdict or not in connection with conspiracy to kidnap and kidnapping? Well, we have the verdict for you right now. This was from yesterday. Take a look. Well, there you have it. Tammy Moore found guilty of kidnapping and conspiracy to kidnap. Now, Lizette, I'll ask the question now that we know the verdict. Is it the fact that she took the stand that did her in?
I think so. We spoke about this case the last time I was here. Kidnapping, the way the charges were formulated, it was a difficult case. They never found a body. It was very circumstantial. As you remember, her spouse or boyfriend was also tried for the same.
Her husband, yeah.
Her husband.
Sydney, yeah.
He was also tried, and I believe that case ended up in a hung jury, or there was no. So when she took that stand against, I'm sure, counsel's advisories, she pretty much, her credibility becomes an open book. And if the jury had any doubt that she was involved, she sealed the deal for them.
Because they didn't have a strong case.
Because they did not have a strong case. Her testimony basically helped that jury convict her.
But here's the question. Do you think they were so inflamed by, they're looking at pictures of this young girl, she's disappeared, no one knows what happened to her, they're just assuming, well, who else would have done something to her? Does that go into their mind, you think?
I think that goes into their mind, but when a defendant, even when you have jurors thinking that, but you don't have a defendant testify, there's still it's easier to have that reasonable doubt. But when she comes in and testifies and does the job that she did for 2 days, where her own attorneys were scrambling to try to save face,
yeah,
she pretty much sealed the deal against herself.
Well, we know that she was found guilty, and interestingly, she was also sentenced yesterday as well. But she and her defense counsel had an opportunity to speak before sentencing. Let's play some of that right now. Well, that's Tammy Moore speaking to the judge and throwing her attorneys under the bus. This is right before she was sentenced. Lizette, throwing your attorneys under the bus, what's the strategy there?
I'm smelling an ineffective assistance of counsel claim, an appeal. She's clearly setting the record. You know, I was left alone, my lawyers did nothing for me, and when you start hearing that, it's definitely an appeal that she's probably going to try to preserve.
You mean to get a new trial?
To get it. Well, to appeal the case, to appeal the decision.
And does she have a point?
You know, anyone can assert ineffective assistance of counsel. We don't know what happened between herself and her attorneys. But I have to tell you that any seasoned attorney would know that putting a client, a defendant on the stand is usually not the common strategy.
Well, maybe what happened was, and again, I'm not involved in these conversations, maybe she felt that her attorneys weren't doing a good enough job under cross-examination or presenting their case, and she's like, you know what? I have to get on the stand and explain my story, and they couldn't control her.
That could be. It also could be going back to who she is. She's very manipulative. She's always right. She controls the situation. We know she controlled her relationship with her partner. You get those clients that they are always in charge. They need to manipulate and control the situation. We don't know what happened, right? We don't know. But the bottom line is she got convicted and she's unhappy with her lawyers, and now it's somebody else's fault. Right?
Right. It's somebody else's fault who did this. And I wonder if the state is looking at this and say, hey, we just successfully prosecuted Tammy Moore. Let's go back to Sidney Moore and retry him on those kidnapping charges.
Well, the thought crossed my mind, but I think what the state wanted is what they got. Justice for the victim. And I believe all along, my theory has been she's always been the mastermind behind everything. So I believe that they got who was behind all of this. There's some justice, someone's being held accountable, and I don't see them trying the case again.
One of the things that we kept seeing in this case was, the prosecution may not be presenting a strong enough case, and they may not be able to prove it, but at the end of the day, everybody thought that the Moores had something to do with Miss Elvis's disappearance. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we are going to reveal to you the sentencing in the Moore case. So stay tuned here on Law and Crime. That was Terry Elvis, though. His daughter has been missing since 2013. Lizette, how can you even imagine what it's like to give that statement? He's not even knowing exactly sure what happened to his daughter. I mean, this wasn't a murder trial. This was a kidnapping trial. So how unbelievably sad is it for a father to be there and not know what happened to his daughter?
Absolutely, and I think what we see most from a father like him is his courage. It takes a lot of courage to be able to stand up in front of everyone and talk about his emotions and feelings about his daughter. You need a lot of courage, and this man is courageous. And for the family, hopefully they now feel, you're never going to fill that void when you lose a loved one, but at least knowing that someone was brought to justice, and in this case, it wasn't just circumstantial evidence. She provided the evidence that led to this verdict.
Right, exactly. And it should be noted that Sidney Moore, even though his first trial for kidnapping charges was a mistrial, he is in jail for 10 years on obstruction of justice in connection with his activities in this case. But now let's get to Tammy Moore's sentence. Okay, this is what we were waiting for. A lot of people were shocked when she was found guilty. They didn't feel that there was enough evidence to prosecute her successfully, but she was prosecuted successfully. And now the question becomes, what will the judge hand down? What will the sentence be? And before we throw to that, I just want to ask you one more question. What do you think is going on in her mind? Do you think she's shocked that she was found guilty?
Absolutely. Absolutely. She is the type of defendant who borders, I don't want to diagnose her, but on the type of sociopath mentality. She's always right. She never makes a mistake. And I think she was shocked. I think she thought that she could sell her story and manipulate this jury, and it backfired on her.
And you think the judge, I'm going to play you the judge's sentence right now, so stand by. We'll talk more about it. So this is when the judge sentences Tammy Moore after she was found guilty of kidnapping and conspiracy to kidnap. Oof, 30 years on each count, but she will serve it concurrently. Lizette, 30 years in prison. That's no joke.
It's not, and I was surprised because this is a person with no criminal record, none whatsoever. She's not a predicate felon. She's first time, and this is what she's getting. So to me, it's very telling. It's telling me that the evidence was that strong, that the judge was convinced, and most importantly, that the victim impact statements, because there's a purpose for them, not just for the family to be able to speak, but also whether or not there are mitigating circumstances, or whether or not the judge is going to make his decision based also on those statements. And to see 30 years concurrent, even if it's concurrent, it's a lot of years for someone with no criminal record.
So something during the course of the trial he was not too happy with. Taking the stand?
I think so. I would agree with that.
Can that be used against her?
No, not be used against it, but what you say is going to be used against you. So it's not the best strategy. I think this is what helped everybody, including the judge, be able to make their decision. The jury did their job, convicting her, and the judge gave her 30 years.
I wonder if she had taken a guilty plea and said, look, I'm sorry, I do admit to this, what would her sentence have been?
You know, not knowing their statute, I can't tell you precisely, but what I can tell you, it would not have been that high.
It would not have been.
I do not think so, because there's a purpose. When you plea bargain, you usually have a range. There is a purpose for it. It's so that you don't do the maximum. I don't know what their statute is with regards to these counts, but 30 years is definitely not something that I would see during a plea bargain on these charges.
And it sounds like she's probably going to appeal this.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, the Tammy Moore saga will probably continue. We'll have to see what will happen to Sidney Moore. Will he be retried on kidnapping charges? But, you know, that was one case to definitely follow. But it's not the only one, because when we come back, we're going to talk about our live trial of the day, and that is the Christopher Love trial. Wow. Okay, so this is Ricardo, okay? Not only was his girlfriend just killed, but now he has to grasp the fact that his ex-girlfriend was the one who hatched the plot to kill her. Wow. I'm back here with criminal defense attorney and former Bronx ADA, Lizette Fernandez, to talk more about that. Lizette, can you imagine what it's like to be him? Can you even imagine what his position, his role is in this whole torrid love affair?
No, it's heartbreaking. I mean, they were on a path. They created a wedding fund. I mean, this was going to be potentially his wife.
Right.
And he truly, genuinely believed that Brenda they were still friends. And so the irony behind all this is that he kept her as a friend, and while he kept connected to her, she was able to stalk him and stalk his girlfriend.
Right. And
so
he said he had no idea that she was capable of this.
No idea, because they shared a cell phone plan. He just seems like a genuine, sweet guy. And people break up. They try to maintain friendships. Who would guess that this woman would be so fascinated with him, obsessed with him, and then Kendra, that she would concoct this plot? Because that's what it was. A plot to kill her.
Let me ask you a question. I mentioned this yesterday. You'll notice throughout the testimony of a lot of witnesses, in the background are pictures of Kendra that are prominently displayed throughout the whole trial. Is that appropriate?
I've never seen that, actually. I was wondering the same thing. I don't know what the rules are in Texas. In New York, I would assume that as defense attorney, I would definitely object to that. Because if I'm representing the defendant, we get it. There was a victim and she passed, but I think having that picture there continuously is it's a constant reminder to the jury of her, and also prejudices the defendant. But I don't know what their rules are over there. I was very surprised that they're there.
Right. One of the questions that we keep talking about is, how do we attach Mr. Love to this crime? We know so much about Brenda Delgado, that she was the mastermind behind this, but what did Christopher Love do? Well, that brings us to Crystal Cortez. Crystal Cortez testified yesterday, and she said she was the getaway driver in this plot. And I want you to listen to her testimony, because she really was a strong witness for the state and helped tie Mr. Love to this entire crime. Well, if you wanted to attach Mr. Love to this crime, having Crystal Cortez come out and say, well, it was his idea to shoot Kendra Hatcher, that's how you do it. Now, Lizette, this witness, you can't help but look at the way this looks. So she's sentenced to 35 years. She took a plea deal. She's in handcuffs. She's giving testimony. Do you think there's a part of the jury that says, well, should we believe her, or did she have an incentive to make any of this up in order to help her case? Because she was on trial. She was facing some serious charges, and maybe 35 years is pretty lenient.
Absolutely. That's a reasonable idea or thought that the jury would have. But I think the state did a really good job here, putting forth the facts, letting everybody know that, you know, she's assumed responsibility, which is big. She's getting 35 years. That's not the sweetest deal. And she's pretty consistent with her story, even though she changed her story around, which is normal. The state did a good job corroborating her true story, which is when she finally tells the truth and says this was a plot all along. When they get the phone records, they corroborate when she was, with at the Sonic getting food. They used the phone records to show that these parties were all together at the same time. So I think that any doubts the jury might have about her credibility were properly addressed by the state with corroborating evidence. And that's what you need, because you can't just rely on a witness who is also, basically a defendant.
Right. Let's play a little bit more of her testimony. And I got to tell you, the way that they just speak so nonchalantly about how they're going to take out this woman is so frightening. But let's play a little bit more of her testimony right now. Okay, no big deal. We're just planning a murder. Just planning a murder here. He's going to be paid in drugs and money. That's what Mr. Love's payment will be. Lizette, you and I talked about this as we were watching this. So they were under the false assumption that Brenda Delgado was part of the cartel, and she'd be able to take care of them. She'd be able to supply them the money and the drugs. If she's part of the cartel, why does she need these yokels to help them do this? Did they really believe this?
I agree with you, but it just goes to show how ignorant they are. I mean, how lack of just common sense they have. If you're connected to the cartel, things get done. They get done. You don't need to find these two, So that, yeah, but it shows you a little bit it gives you an insight of who these people are and what they're thinking, which is clearly they're not.
And you think about what's a human life worth, right?
Absolutely.
He's being paid in coke, kush, marijuana, some money. How frightening is that?
And she got $500, or that's what she was supposed to get. Right.
Do you think that there's an avenue? Do you think that the defense will be doing enough? I mean, we're going to play probably some of the cross-examination later, but what would you do if you were the defense attorney here for Mr. Love?
You know what it is? This is a capital death penalty case. It's very different than your typical murder trial, where the death penalty is not on the table. So the reality is, defense counsel has to focus on the mitigating factors for the penalty phase. There's two phases. There's the trial phase, and then there's a penalty phase. The jury does both. Look, the evidence is strong for the state. There's going to be no doubt that this guy committed the murder. Defense counsel has to focus on the second phase, which is mitigating factors. What do I do to convince this jury to give my guy life and not death? Right. So that's really, when a lot of people watch this, they're wondering, why is this defense attorney not doing a lot of cross? It's hard. The facts, the evidence is there. The reality is, in a death penalty case, you're really trying to save your client's life.
I read that in Texas, they haven't had this kind of death penalty case since 2013. So why are they doing it here? Why are they opting for it here? Is it because it's for the heinous nature of this murder for hire plot?
I would agree so. I mean, this is not your everyday type of murder plot. You would agree with that.
Well, thank goodness.
Yes. And we were saying this before off camera, it's like your typical murder for hire, a law school exam, lying in wait, right? You think that you just read about it, but you're not going to really see this in real life. And it's really tragic. The victim truly was a victim. She had no idea. I mean, she was just targeted just because Brenda Delgado was angry that her former boyfriend didn't want her anymore. I mean,
they had no relationship.
It's heinous. It's heinous. It's horrible. And whether you're a proponent or not of the death penalty, Texas has it. And I believe this is the type of case for them that was worthy of pursuing it.
Absolutely. Now, before we go to our next break, I do want to just let our viewers know one quick thing. There's an update in the Tammy Moore case. Apparently, Heather Elvis's father, Terry Elvis, there is a contempt of hearing happening, a contempt of court hearing happening right now. He's been accused of contempt of court. We're going to let you know if there's any update. We're following it actively, so we'll let you know in a minute. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Wow. That doesn't get any more real than that, does it, Lizette? I mean, it's important that we see the body cam footage, but how does it help the prosecution's case? How does it build the story?
It builds a story because, you can definitely elicit the testimony from the officers. Remember, there was a time where we didn't have body cams, right? So the testimony would come straight from the officer's mouth or pictures. But body cam is something that is fairly new, and jurors want to know about it. They always want to know, did the officers have it? What did they see? They want to see it. So you never want to hold back something from any evidence from the jury that can help them visualize in real time what was going on or what first responders saw. When you're on the defense side, you want to limit that a little because, once again, you don't want to, keep reminding the jury about how heinous this crime was because, once again, you're representing the defendant, and so there's got to be a balance. The prosecution's always going to want to use it to tell their story 1, 2, 3, as many times as they can, and for the jurors to visualize. But on the defense side, you want to try to limit that.
Yeah, and
it's highly prejudicial.
And it's important to get a visual of what the scene looked like and what was happening, as disturbing as that image is. But, this is not the only piece of evidence that we have about the crime scene. I want to play the testimony of a witness who was right there when the shooting took place. And this, again, it doesn't get any more real than this. Take a look. Wow, somebody who was right there when the shooting took place. And Lizette, we can criticize these defendants for a lot here. But one of the interesting things you can't help but think, if they were so good at plotting this murder, why would they do it in a public garage like this? Why do it right here? I mean, yes, they were tracking her, but look what's happening. You get surveillance, you get eyewitnesses. It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't, and it goes back to just show how small-minded they were. I mean, they couldn't believe when it hit the media how much media attention it got. I mean, how it's a murder in open daylight. It's also very telling how Ms. Cortez also didn't know which way to go. And so now you're fleeing a murder and you're going down the wrong way. And she had to come back. So it just goes back to show you how just simple-minded all three of them
Right.
were.
And it's funny, you not funny, but you want to attach Brenda Delgado to this as the mastermind, but we can't forget who we're talking about here. We're talking about Christopher Love, the alleged shooter, and the one who said, hey, if out of all of our options, including kidnapping her, hitting her with a hypodermic needle, or shooting her, we should shoot her. Let's play some testimony right now from Officer Michael Freeman from the Dallas Police Department, who analyzed the search history, the internet search history of the defendant after the shooting, and this is very telling. Take a look. Lizette, you gotta be careful what you look up. Am I right or am I right?
Oh, yeah.
Now, what you see right here is a live feed into the Christopher Love case. Unfortunately, we have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to be live in that courtroom. Stay tuned. All right, everybody, we have an update right now for you in the Tammy Moorer case. As we last reported, Terry Elvis, who's the father of Heather Elvis, he has been accused of contempt of court, and he has been allegedly made a threatening statement or an inappropriate statement to Casey Brown, who was Tammy Moorer's attorney. It's been alleged that he called him a despicable lowlife and yelled at him at an earlier point in the case. It should be noted now that we just got an update from Alex Lang, who's from the Sun News, that Victim Services Director Patty Fine said she didn't see the incident but talked to Terry Elvis about it. She said no family has gone through more than the Elvis family in the last 5 years. I feel with all my heart that there is not a bit of harm in Terry Elvis. We will let you know a little bit more about what is happening in that courtroom. There are no cameras that are allowed, but we will be reporting back to you. Let's switch gears and talk about our live trial, which we're in right now, and that is the Christopher Love case. I'm back here with Lizette Fernandez. Lizette, we're analyzing, how these people were caught, and particularly how Christopher Love was caught in connection with this, and analyzing that vehicle with the gun in it. You can put two and two together.
Yeah, clearly, once again, it wasn't thought out. The gun is in the car that they, I believe, traced Love's phone to that car, and that's how they found him and the car and the gun. The detective who is testifying right now has to show the chain of evidence, how the procedure happened, but the gun was there, and whether or not it was wiped, the murder weapon was found in possession of Christopher Love.
You know what's interesting when you think about this? They talk about, oh, well, Crystal Cortez wanted to get a silencer. Christopher Love had the idea of, oh, let's use gloves, we'll clean off the gun. These were not sophisticated professionals, despite the testimony that would seem to suggest that they were.
That's right, they were not. I mean, it's clear. Every single mistake they could have made, they did. And this is why he's now facing the death penalty.
Right.
I mean, this was a pretty heinous crime, and it was planned out. And they planned it out, but they didn't think it through, obviously.
Yeah. Pretty crazy listening to the details of this case. It sounds like a movie, and unfortunately, it's not. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back live in Christopher Love. Okay, everybody, we have an update for you in the Tammy Moore case. It has been confirmed that Terry Elvis, the father of Heather Elvis, was just found guilty of contempt of court. He will have to pay a $400 fine. If he doesn't, that's 30 days in jail. This is pretty unbelievable what we're reporting. We thought it was the conclusion of the case, but apparently he had made inappropriate comments to Casey Brown, who was Tammy Moore's attorney, and in fact yelled at him during one of the courtroom breaks. It was said that he called him a despicable lowlife at one point. We reported earlier that Victim Services Director Patty Fine said she didn't actually see the incident, but she did talk to Terry Elvis about it. She wanted to make clear that no family has gone through more than what the Elvis family has gone through in the last 5 years. And she says, I feel with all my heart that there is not a bit of harm in Terry Elvis. Well, clearly the judge felt differently and did find him guilty of contempt of court. This is all being reported by Alex Lang from the Sun News. If there's any further developments in that Moore courtroom, we're going to let you know, but we did want to let you know what was happening. This is a pretty interesting development, Lizette, especially in consideration of what this family has gone through.
Agreed, and it's unfortunate, but you have to understand when you're dealing with contempt of court, you're talking about a judicial order, and judges take that very seriously. And
yeah,
that's the result.
That is the result. Okay, everybody, we're going to switch gears right now, and we are going to go live into a different courtroom, and that is the Christopher Love case. Let's go live. A new witness is on the stand. Let's go. Okay, so let's break down some of this testimony right now as we are understanding exactly how, unfortunately, this victim sustained these gunshot wounds. And I'm back here with Lizette Fernandez to break it down. Lizette, it seems pretty counterintuitive. I mean, we know what happened here, but it's important nonetheless for the jury to hear this information. Why is it important for them to hear this, though?
It's important because, one, it's part of the evidence, but two, the gunpowder residue is very important to connect Mr. Love to the crime, and so it has to be established. You know how it was found on the body, where the residue was from. All those steps are very important. And though it's kind of graphic because you hear exactly the scientific method behind it, the jury needs to hear it.
What does the defense do? Do they question the methodology? Do they question? I mean, how do they really defend their client here?
Traditionally, there's not much one can do. I mean, these are straightforward forensic witnesses. So this is probably not a field. I mean, it's the powder test. You know, was the testing done correct? Was the protocol followed? And there's not much that one can do. Defense has to focus on other aspects of other witnesses in testimony, but this is pretty straightforward.
Okay, let's go back into the courtroom and we can learn a little bit more from the testimony. Again, this is the Christopher Love case out of Texas. Down a little bit about what's happening in this case, and I'm back here with Lizette Fernandez to talk about it, and thanks so much for coming on to talk about this case. I got to ask you, though, in your experience, do you see these murder-for-hire plots more or less, I mean, in your day-to-day?
Oh, these are definitely on the less end. This is not a common type of thing. I mean, you see it in the movies, you read about it here and there, but this is definitely one of those that a movie could be made out of because it's just so crazy. The thoughts behind the plot are crazy.
And you have to imagine that they hire a third party to do the act, to commit the killing, so that they're not implicated. But it becomes even more messy for them, doesn't it, in these kinds of situations?
Absolutely. And also in this case, Brenda Delgado is a control freak. She wants to control everything. She wants to decide, you know, she wants to be part of the whole thing. I mean, she could have put together the plot, had other people carried it out, and been in Mexico. But she was around during all of it, and that's one of the scary things about her. She wanted to have Kendra's purse. It's almost like she wanted to just be Kendra.
Right.
You know, she wanted that purse. That's another interesting thing that we get from Cortez. What did Delgado tell you after the fact? She told me to get that purse.
Do you see that kind of obsession as a motivating factor in a lot of these kinds of cases, the disgruntled, jilted lovers?
Absolutely. And those are the scarier ones because they're just not thinking.
They're running on
just
emotions.
Completely running on emotions. Clearly, this case is she was running on emotions. She saw this was going towards possibly a marriage, right? We know that the relationship was moving quickly, and she just couldn't have that. And if, you know, she had to get rid of Kendra, was the target. She was the enemy.
Now, the interesting thing to note about Kendra is that, Brenda, is that she tried to escape.
Yeah.
And she was brought back to the U.S., but as a condition of that, she won't face the death penalty, will she?
She will not. She actually did escape. I mean, the interesting thing is police interviewed her immediately after the incident, but they didn't gather enough information. They didn't have enough to hold her. So she was released. She fled to Mexico, and so basically she escaped. And then once the police had enough information, they dealt with Mexican authorities to extradite her, which is a complex process. But the number one thing with countries that will expedite is we will not, they make it clear, we will work with you as long as you take the death penalty off the table. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened in this case. So we got Brenda back. They extradited her, but she will not be facing the death penalty.
But she could be facing life in prison.
Absolutely.
Right, and so we have Crystal Cortez, 35 years in prison. Mr. Love, currently on trial, could face the potential of the death penalty.
That's right.
And we have Brenda Delgado. You know, the idea that these three could have were allegedly, you know, successful in committing this crime. I think it's shocking when you're listening to the details of how they were trying to make this happen. These are not trained professionals, and yet what ultimately resulted was the death of this beautiful young pediatric dentist who it's just a real shame. It's a really sad case. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be live in Christopher Love. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We are live right now in the Christopher Love case. David Spence is on the stand. He is somebody who is investigating the gunshot residue in connection with this shooting. We are going to go live back into that courtroom right now. Remember, Christopher Love is on trial for the murder of a young pediatric dentist named Kendra Hatcher. And it was alleged that he was hired by Brenda Delgado, who became furious over the fact that Hatcher was dating her ex-boyfriend and was maybe going to marry him. Let's go live.
You know, wiping your hands on your pants or whatever would remove or reduce the number of particles from your hands. On a deceased individual, people that are handling the body, that may be trying to perform medical assistance or what have you, there's possibility of removing particles from the hands just based on those activities.
That's all. Thank you. Pass it.
No further.
Thank you, sir. You may stay down. You're free to leave.
Thank you, Your Honor.
State called Warren Jenkins.
All right, not really sure why the camera is behind the courtroom. Almost looks like a peeping Tom shot, but, you know, we'll figure out that in a second. Lizette, we come back to this case, and I can't help but think about how ultimately sad it is when you have a victim and a defendant who didn't even know each other. You know, how upsetting is that? And the fact that this isn't even, this was a man who was hired allegedly by a third party to take her out, and she had no idea what was going on. She was being stalked. I mean, we learned from Crystal Cortez she was being stalked for weeks as they were plotting this out. Can you imagine this?
No, and that's the most heartbreaking part of this case, because any of us could put ourselves in Kendra's shoes. We are just living our lives. I mean, that's how scary it is, that you don't know who's watching you. You don't know who's disliking you so much. I mean, they never met. Her and Ricardo never even shared with Brenda the girl's name that he was dating, and yet Brenda knew everything about her. I mean, that's the scary part.
Yeah.
You know, and Kendra was going about her life. I mean, they were going on vacation the next day. We haven't talked about that. They were going on vacation the next day. She was picking up a camera from her friend's house. I mean, this was.
And he was waiting for her at the apartment.
Yes.
I mean, I'm talking, of course, about Ricardo, her boyfriend.
At her apartment, because they were going to get together, they were going to eat something, and they were going to go away the next day. I mean, they were living their daily life just like you and I would be living our life. And that's the scary part, how it just, they went from being a happy, loving couple and she's living life to being shot in the head.
Out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere.
And she didn't even know that people were following her. This is a really, really unbelievable set of circumstances. Let's go back live into the courtroom right now. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break on our end, and when we come back, we're going to be live back in that studio. But before we do, I want to just see if we can have a quick conversation with Lizette Fernandez about this. Lizette, where do you expect the case to go? We've seen the prosecution put on a very strong case so far. Where do you think they're going to keep going?
The prosecution?
Yeah.
They need to, I mean, it's a capital murder case, so they have to establish every element. And I know that it may seem tedious how we have to hear sometimes they put on a witness with 5-10 questions, but the reality is they have to build their case because you have to prove all the elements of the case. And it's a murder for hire case. There was a conspiracy, so you have to connect everybody through physical and verbal testimony. And so I think they're nearing the end of they've done forensics, they've done, the co-defendant, the co-conspirator, and so I think they're honing in on resting.
And do you think the defense puts Mr. Love on the stand? And I know we only have about 20 seconds left.
I certainly do not think they should, but who knows what their strategy is?
Who knows what their strategy is? And I know that
or who knows what Mr. Love wants?
Exactly. It's ultimately his decision.
That's
and,
right.
And a week where we saw the testimony of Tammy Moore, and that was unexpected, who knows what we'll see. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. And when we come back, we'll be live in Christopher Love out of Texas. Stay tuned. Driver who testified yesterday and how her stories didn't match up. She was basically lying to investigators. So I always wonder, if I'm sitting in the jury and I'm wondering, well, if she had the gall to, first of all, commit this crime, and two, lie to investigators, why should we believe her now when she's on the stand and she was given a plea deal for a reduced sentence?
And that's a good observation, and it's natural, and it's every human being wants to know, well, if she lied then, is she lying now? And it's one of the biggest hurdles the prosecution, which not if she lied then, she lied now, but which story is the truth, right?
Yep.
And that's one of the biggest hurdles the prosecution has when their main witness, their linchpin, is a co-conspirator or another criminal. But I believe in this case, based on what I've seen thus far, the prosecution is able to corroborate the true story, or what we believe is the correct story in this case. And they have phone records, and they have statements from law enforcement. So when you have other stuff that corroborates the time and the places of the story that makes the most sense, which she is now saying, we knew all along, we had planned this, and we were going to kill her, and then make it look like it was a robbery gone bad. I think that gives the jury an opportunity to say, okay, this is probably what, close to, because we'll never know, right? Close to what really happened.
Right.
But it is a huge hurdle that the
Absolutely.
prosecution has.
Absolutely. And, we're listening to Detective Eric Barnes from the Dallas County Police Department going through these interviews. And one of the things that he mentioned is when he spoke to Brenda Delgado, he said that the conversation seemed very prepared. And that becomes a big issue, he also said, with Cortez as well. It became very prepared. Have you seen that as a lot of times in your experience when defendants are questioned by police, they seemed overly prepared and it's a suspicious thing?
It's actually, it's not that common. Usually they're not as prepared, and that's where it baffled me a little bit when I heard his testimony and how prepared Brenda was. And that's because you would think, right, common sense, that if you commit a crime, you're hoping that the authorities are not going to be focusing on you, so therefore you're not going to take the time to have this elaborate explanation, but clearly here they did, but it wasn't that elaborate because the story didn't make any sense. So it goes back to how simple-minded they were. It draws the authorities even to hone in more and say, like, this is not right. This story isn't correct. And it almost makes, I mean, that's how Cortez ends up just coming out and saying, it's, you know, I was involved and I'm lying. So it was interesting. Usually I haven't seen it that way where they're so prepared. I mean, there was the receipt that the detective speaks about. It's almost like, you know, she safeguarded.
Oh, I was here. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, so that's an interesting, but I think it goes back to Brenda being in control and thinking that she's smarter than she is.
I always think it's fascinating when investigators look into cases and how they find their suspects. I always think it's fascinating because it's very different than how it's portrayed on TV.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be live back in the Christopher Love trial. You're getting the best of me in this case. I think I'm so shocked by what happened, especially after it was the conclusion of the case. You know, to hear the father of the victim being held in contempt of court.
Yeah, it's actually unfortunate because we heard his victim impact statement. It was just heartbreaking, and his family's been through so much. But at the end of the day, you know, contempt is a judicial order, and at some point he must have been ordered to refrain from attacking the defense, because we have to remember each side has a job, and whether you like it or not, a defense attorney is doing his job representing his client. So when this father acted on his emotions, it's unfortunate, but if there's a judicial order and he violated that, then the judge has the right to do it, which is what he did, find him in contempt.
Right, and I just want to let our viewers know that what we just showed you was not the contempt hearing, which happened earlier today. The cameras were not allowed in the courtroom. That was merely Terry Elvis speaking to the judge during the sentencing phase. And on the other hand, Lizette, you really got to say, how can you blame a family member for getting that emotional? I mean, we're talking about his daughter who hasn't been seen since 2013.
No, absolutely, and so you know, I'm just trying to be as impartial as possible so that the viewers can understand why this would even happen, right? The logistics behind that. But yes, I agree with you. How can you blame this father from being so emotional? I personally have never seen something like this, but this is, what is it, South Carolina? Mm-hmm. Different states, you know, I don't think I would see that happening here in New York City.
Exactly. Well, all right, so here's what we're going to do. We are going to take a quick break on our end, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about the Christopher Love case, which is currently on break, but there is a lot to discuss in this really, really sad, but also very interesting love triangle gone horribly wrong. We'll be right back. We're seeing the defendant's police interrogation tape, which is always something we love to see in these kinds of cases. Lizette, though, when we're looking at it, you mentioned body language. He's interesting to watch, right? He's got his hands inside the sweater. I mean, what do you make of his demeanor?
From the beginning, it's just he's being standoffish. You know, I mean, look at him. He's like made a cocoon for himself in his sweater. You know, detectives are trained, especially the ones that have been doing this. If you're working a capital murder case, I'm assuming they're using the best of the best. That's what they do. They look at the eye contact. They look at the body language. You don't have to be an expert to know that when somebody's, you know, crossing their arms or pushing back, pulling away, and here we see him putting his arms inside, like almost building this facade around himself. He's got something to hide. You know, they look at all these things. They see how somebody responds to their questions, and you know, as time goes on, they always trip. They always
say something
that goes against what they might have said 5 minutes ago.
One of the things that we noted, and I'm kind of seeing it a little bit here. Obviously, he's currently on trial. It's, you know, he hasn't been found guilty of anything yet. The question is the lack of remorse. And we talked about a little bit with Crystal Cortez, who pled guilty. When she testified, didn't seem one shred of remorse for what she did. Nothing. And I'm kind of seeing the same thing here in his police interrogation tape.
Yeah, I would agree with you. She was very matter of fact. I have seen it where when a co-defendant or a defendant starts telling and they hear themselves telling what they've done or participated in. I've seen it where you see the remorse. And, that usually helps sometimes. The jury sees a human being. But here, there is no remorse. Very matter of fact. It's almost like they were eating a pizza and discussing, murder one. And with him, we don't know if he's going to testify, but we're watching his interrogation, and once again, very, very matter of fact.
That's what's so chilling about this,
Very
watching
chilling.
them talk about this and describe it with, as if, like you said, ordering a pizza. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be live in Love. I didn't have anything to do with a white dentist, black dentist, white dentist. I don't know nothing. I was at home, bro. Okay, Lizette. So he's claiming he has an alibi and that he has nothing to do with this. This is the beginning part of the interrogation tape. What do you make of it so far?
He's just trying to bail himself out. I mean, he's unaware, shockingly, that they did this in a public place, that there's probably footage of him, that there's eyewitnesses, and he's just thinking he's going to deny it, give a fake alibi, and be done with it.
And I wonder if he was really falsely accused, his demeanor would be a little bit different. Maybe.
That's food for thought.
Food for thought. Lizette, thank you so much
Thank
for
you for
coming on
having me.
today. You were fantastic.
Always a pleasure.
I can't wait to have you back. So again, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, we are going to take a quick break. I will be signing off. Bob Bianchi will be signing in, and we are going to continue our conversation and our coverage of Christopher Love. Stay tuned.